This week, we are discussing winter landscape photography in Michigan's Upper Peninsula with Neil Weaver. You are listening to the LAKESCAPE Photography Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the LAKESCAPE Photography Podcast. Today I'm joined by Neil Weaver of Neil Weaver Photography, and we're going to be discussing landscape photography in Michigan with a focus on winter and the different experiences and places and all the little gems and secrets that Michigan has for us, the Great Lakes state. Neil, go ahead, say hi, introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Neil Weaver. I am a landscape photographer based in Michigan. I live in the Lower Peninsula now, but I was born and raised up in the Eastern Upper Peninsula near Sault Ste. Marie. And photography started for me 24 years ago now, when I was still a kind of college age. And art was always a big part of my life through school. I was an art student every year that I went to school, even into college. But I never had taken a photography class. You know, they weren't even available at the high school I was in or the college I went to at the time. Hard to believe, but there was no class available. So, but I like two-dimensional art and photography. Really, when I started, it was just like this new thing that was just like the answer. Like I always liked art, but photography seemed like this is the perfect medium for me to work in, and I really enjoyed it. And really, just going to places, being in the outdoors, and experiencing different locations around Michigan is what really got me excited for it. Um, so over the years, I shot just for fun and film, and then I switched to digital in 2006 and started a business a few years, several years later. But yeah, just a lot of trips up to northern Michigan, around the Great Lakes. Um, I teach workshops now with a friend of mine, Aubrietta Hope, and we do different workshops around the northern part of Michigan. And just been enjoying everything, just enjoying every experience, being in the outdoors, and just seeing all these beautiful places around the state of Michigan. So
Michigan is fantastic for everything outdoors, everything nature. One thing that you had mentioned in there that you had taken some art classes, and it made me think back to my beginning. I did the same thing. I took a lot of art classes. What kind of art classes were you involved with?
Oh, just different two-dimensional classes. I even took some sculpture classes as well. But I always just loved drawing and some painting. My mom was a watercolor painter, and I always really enjoyed watercolor. I was not good at it. I didn't really do much of it myself. I kind of did more acrylic. But drawing, pencil drawing, I just loved it. I have a lot of sketch pads from when I was a kid. I used to design Nike shoes when I was, probably 11 or 12 years old. I even mailed some designs off to Nike, which they sent back to me and politely, did not accept. But, but
The
yeah, I,
effort
I
was
just
there.
really, oh yeah, and I just loved it. I was always a sports fan and really just enjoyed drawing pictures of logos and just different designs and also just athletes, playing their sports, things like that. When I got into early into high school, I got into snowboarding and then skateboarding. And what really I think started the spark for the photography thing, and I didn't even, think much about it as much at the time because I had no money for a camera, and all my money was going into snowboard gear at the time anyway, so that probably wouldn't have happened anyway. But the beautiful photography in the snowboard magazines. I would look at those magazines from cover to cover like 5 or 6 times over every month, and just the still images were so powerful.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, this is amazing. Like a still image that had so much energy and like movement and excitement in it. Was kind of like struck me. And so a few years later, when I did take my first shots outdoors, I was just like, okay, yeah, this is something I can get into, and it just kind of went from there. So
As you were going through these points of film, even drawing and inspiration from magazines and then moving to film and then moving to digital. Was there a moment in there that you felt like the light bulb came on and you were like, yes, landscapes 100%. This is what I want to do?
I think the first time I got my film developed in 2001, when I took my first shots of, which weren't nice, that great, by the way. Obviously, they were pretty sad. But at the time, to me, they were like, "Wow, this is really cool." And they were just, it was sunset shots at uh, Pentwater on the pier there.
Yeah.
And looking back, the shots weren't anything, but at the time, I thought they were, and that's just what got me going, and that provided a spark. And again, I love the outdoors and different places. Just being on the Great Lakes, at the beaches that we have, and going back to when I was a kid, my parents would we take a lot of day trips out, west of the UP. We might go to a place called the Pines, or anywhere, any of these places along the lake shore that just there was just nobody around. It was just you had the place yourself, and something about that was just really special. And so now going back again, and you've mentioned it in different podcasts. A lot of it's just about the experience, and so I don't know how much I love photography or that it is tied to these places that I love.
Yeah, it's that experience piece with enjoying those moments that speak to us and being out there. It's almost like the solitude. It doesn't necessarily have to be a solo pursuit, but at the same time, I feel like a lot of photographers, myself included, I'm out there and yeah, some hikes are better than others and some adventures are more rewarding than others, but it's just the simple act of being there and enjoying it and being in the places that you love. That's huge.
Absolutely, yeah. And like you said, the solitude is wonderful, and I think it's it's there's a nice combination there of doing some of the stuff on your own, and then doing some of it with spending it with friends or family or kids. Having all of those experiences are important. And so there's places that I go that I by myself, and the first thing I'm thinking is, man, I can't wait to show my wife and kids when they
Yeah.
come up here. Or just any of my friends, just like that I shoot with, just how much I can't wait to show them this place too. So there's kind of that combination of your love for solitude, but also um, sharing it with other people too.
I think that's a big reason why a lot of us do photography is we just want to share the things we love with others. One thing that came to mind as we were talking about all these different experiences and all this different stuff that has led us in different directions. How would you say that changed your approach to photography over the years?
I feel like I have become a lot more patient. Um, Early on, it was kind of like this mad dash to try to get shots of all these different places when you're on a trip, and you have maybe, let's say, a week, and you're just trying to hit up as many places as you can, and
Yeah.
and in the process, you're not really coming away with a lot of quality work. And then you get to a point where you're like, what am I doing? And you're not really even enjoying it. You just feel like you're just trying to experience all these places without really, really enjoying them. And that's going to affect your work. And you're kind of what I was doing at the time. This is pretty early on. It's kind of the same thing that a lot of tourists do. They walk out to a spot and they take a picture with their phone, and then they walk away. They're like there for 2 or 3 minutes, and then they leave because it was like, okay, check that off my list. And really, as a photographer, we that's not something that really I ever want to do, because really it's about being out there and experience the place. And the more time you spend at a location, you're just gonna become more, I don't know, comfortable, familiar with it. You're gonna find more things. You're gonna hear the sounds. You're gonna see the movement in the trees or the leaves, and all those things come together to help you, create a better image, and overall just have a better experience while you're there too. But yeah, I think the patience part of it is huge for me. And also, I think over the years I've kind of always, especially, I got to a point where I had plans to take certain shots that I wanted. when I go on a trip, and that's still true in some cases. But I think overall, I tend to keep my expectations lower now than I used to, and just keep an open mind and not really get hung up on any doing any certain thing or place. Just kind of wing it almost, and maybe that's not always the best plan for everybody, but for me, it just kind of works for what I do, and just play it by ear and not try to plan things out too much. So
Yeah, don't put that pressure on yourself. Just go there and take that experience in first and see what's revealed. I think that's a great approach. And I still work on it myself a lot of the times because I'll driving somewhere, you're thinking for however many hours it takes you to get there about there's this spot and that spot. And then you kind of put these epic images together in your mind. And then you get there and you're like, okay, now I'm gonna go find it. And then it's, oh wait, I have to slow down a little bit.
well, yeah, and I think that now when I go up on a trip, I just kind of everything's kind of fluid and just okay, well, I'll decide when I get up there, and
Yeah.
and it's just kind of like, okay, do I take a right or a left here? And then you get to a point where you're just there and you have to make that right or left to this place or that place. And again, I don't know if I recommend that to everybody, but it just works for my personality and how I do things. But and again, like, I think just keeping my expectations low, or not low, but just not set too many expectations for what I'm going to get. Um, for me, I don't go away disappointed ever because I kind
Yeah.
of,
Mm.
there's no trip that I consider a failure because my expectations weren't very high in the first place. And if I come away with some things that I'm happy with, great. And usually that happens at least a few shots because, yeah, again, I didn't really, I don't really have anything in mind necessarily for shots. So it's kind of like, hey, whatever comes out of it, great. So
Yeah. That's kind of our universal way of approaching things for some of us, and for others it might look different. And I think that's one of the things that it's especially challenging with winter.
with winter photography, I think there I think a certain level of planning is good. And I don't necessarily mean like necessarily what kind of shots you want, but planning for what you're going to be dealing with out there with the elements. So I mean, in that case, planning is huge. But um, winter is interesting because it can be incredibly beautiful, but also it can be disappointing at the same time. Where if you do have a thought in your head about a certain shot, like a couple years ago, I think I was going to Gabriel Falls. I couldn't even see it. It was just encased in ice because of all the mist that had frozen up over it. And so, you make this long drive to a certain spot, and it doesn't look anything. It's not even uh, anything you can photograph. You wouldn't even know it was a waterfall. Tequamana Falls, I've had that happen too, where you can barely see anything. So that is one thing where, again, expectations, you got to keep them realistic in a way because it might not look, you might picture this beautiful scene when you get there, and it just might not do that. And a lot of times too, with the tannin in the water, and a lot of these waterfalls, and it freezes up, it starts looking like just kind of brown. So it's not really picturesque necessarily all the time either. It just depends on the situation. Um, but that's also what makes the winter photography scene so fun because you don't know what you're going to get, and year to year it's different. And even within the winter, from the span of like from the beginning until the end of the winter, um, it just there's so many changes going on. So
Right.
early winter is a good time to hit certain spots up, and maybe late winter for other things when the ice is built up more. So, you can if you take multiple trips during a single winter, you can really see some really different things in one place, in one location.
What does your planning and preparation look like when you're coming up to your winter adventures? You're looking at different places, from planning, desktop recon, looking at stuff, trying to figure out where you want to go, to actually physically going there.
Yeah, first of all, I want to make sure that the locations that I'm going to are accessible. There's been so many times where it's like, well, if I had a snowmobile, I could get there, but I
Yeah.
don't. So, and I guess I could rent one. I just haven't done that. But there's so many places where you might have something in mind, and then you get there, and it's like, okay, there's too much snow on the road. It's a seasonal road, so it's not plowed, and so that I can just mark that off the list. It's not going to happen this trip, So, maybe sometimes when you get the first snowfall, or maybe early in the season when the road's still passable, um, on a specific location, you can do that. But so that's the first thing I'll kind of look at. Is it accessible? And then, from that point, I'm just looking at, how long is the hike? Is it a place where I want to go in by myself? If something happens, I do have a GPS, like a rescue beacon,
Yeah.
and that's nice to have. I text my wife and let her know where I'm going or where I'm going to be at. So, just things like that to prepare for, just if something were to happen, somebody knows where I'm at. If God forbid I need to be rescued,
Yeah, let's not go that
there's,
route.
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, we don't want to do that. But in case, but yeah, when I'm preparing, I don't, the big thing is making sure I have all my proper gear with me. Um, when you go out in extreme cold, if you got water, one thing I found out the hard way, myself and my friend Craig Sturkin, when we were on our way over to Grand Island back in 2015, we brought water, except it froze on us, so
Oh
we had
no.
nothing to drink, because yeah, it was so cold. I can't remember the temperature, but it was down. I want to say in the low teens, maybe. That morning it was probably, obviously, I'm sure it was quite a bit colder than that. But all we packed were, I hate to say it, but all we packed were like salty snacks, like peanuts and things like that, and then gas station stuff on the way,
Yeah.
and then bottles of water. And yeah, we quickly realized that we had no water, because it had frozen. So things like that. That now I'll use an insulated thermos or something to put my water in, and just things that, even in your vehicle, how do you get out of a situation where you might get stuck? What are you going to do?
Right.
So, just having those things in case something happens, um, being prepared, because again, it gets dark earlier in the wintertime. Do you have a light? Um, do you have just those things that are going to keep you warm? Like, I might even pack an extra, like, down jacket that I can pack into my backpack. Always an extra pair of gloves, things like that. Having with you is huge. Sunglasses or something that, because again, you're out in the elements, and all of a sudden maybe it's a bright sunny day, and that snow is just, after a while, your eyes get fatigued. I mean, it is so bright, it makes a huge difference. But just little things like that, just little supplies that I might not be that critical or crucial if it was any other time of the year. But, when you get in the wintertime, there's certain things that you just don't want to forget, because you might really pay for it.
That's something that I think all of us, people that are outdoorsy, people that are out there like us for photography, anything, there's so many other things that you have to be aware of. And I do a lot of the same myself. I have a shell jacket that I wear, and then different fleeces and everything underneath, throw an extra layer in the top of the bag just in case. I actually had a similar thing happen to me last year in February. I went for a hike one afternoon. I had my Nalgene filled with water, and I went to get a drink, and the whole top of it was frozen shut. And I was like, all right, well, I guess that's not going to work out for me today. It's those things that, the little quirky things that you just sometimes overlook. It's even more intense in the winter, because now you've got to work with the elements, you've got to work with your gear, you've got to work with a whole lot of different things. So
Absolutely. Yeah, one thing that I, have run into shooting the ice caves, especially, or even in waterfalls, is like, you might as well just get your blower or a cloth out, which I don't use a cloth so much. Usually I just blow it off to the edges of my front of my lens, but you might as well have it out and just put it in your pocket right away, because you're going to get dripped on. You're going to get
mhm,
water splashing up if you're working close to the stuff. But like in an ice cave, it might be super cold in there, but it's still dripping.
right.
Even if it's 5 degrees outside, it's still dripping in that cave. So, that's something that is, you run into pretty quick. If you don't have something to blow it or wipe it off, then you're going to be in for some trouble. It's going to be freezing up on the front of your lens pretty quickly. So, winter photography is interesting too, because, you know, you might do all this hiking to a spot, you get all warm and maybe sweaty, and it's cold out, but you stay warm just walking. Your feet are warm because that blood's flowing, and then we just stop and start shooting in a location, and we might be sitting still, or mostly sitting still, for an hour or two, or maybe even more, and really not moving around a ton. So you go from really working up get that blood flowing to just not moving much. So it's really the way you gear up and, what you wear and what you bring with you is really important because it's so easy to get cold quickly once you stop moving out there and you start working. And, if you're not staying warm and comfortable, how good are your shots going to come out when you can't concentrate because you're so cold. Your hands are cold, your toes are freezing, you can't feel your toe. I mean, just how are you going to concentrate on a composition or your settings when you're just being distracted by just discomfort?
Right. Yeah, that's a huge thing. A very good point is just in the winter, it's a totally different world.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you get to a point where you can't feel the ends of your fingers, and when you're trying to hit the shutter button, you can't. You get to a point where I can't even tell that I'm pushing a button down. That's how bad I've had it sometimes. Maybe out at the lakeshore when that wind's just blowing. Maybe at Grand Haven, things like that, where even with gloves on, you're at the point where you can't even feel the button on the camera and tell if it's being pushed down or not. That's how
Right.
you know, like, okay, this is not this is not going well.
Yeah.
And again, it's hard to enjoy and really hard to keep shooting when that happens, but it does happen, and
Yeah.
more so if you're not really prepared with the right gear. So
When you're taking all these things into consideration and you're scouting locations or considering locations, how are you working with that in that regard of distance, equipment required, bring food, bring water, stay warm? How are you kind of addressing these challenges of the winter landscape?
well, I think just looking into, okay, how much snow is there on the ground? What am I walking through? Is it a packed trail? Is it something I might need snowshoes? Am I going to be walking through deep snow or not? Are there any inclines? I always, even if I don't have them on, I always try to throw at the very least, throw in my ice cleats, my smaller ones, the
The micro spikes?
micro spikes. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. They just throw in your pack really easily. They're small to do that with, so that's nice. But having those little things where just you know, what am I going to be dealing with? How far am I walking? Footwear. How cold is it out? Do I need my heavy duty boots on, my Baffins, or can I get away with my Keen boots that are lighter and a little, lighter weight where it might not be so cumbersome walking with them? But again, remembering that you're going to be stopping at some point, and that's when your feet are going to start getting cold. So, am I going to be shooting in ice caves where maybe I don't need my full size tripod. Maybe I want my travel tripod just to squeeze in smaller spaces. Sometimes I find that my regular tripod, my typical really right stuff that I use is just too long. Maybe the legs are too long to fit back in certain tight spaces. So maybe knowing that, I might bring my travel tripod, or maybe I'll bring both and just throw it on my pack if it's not that long of a hike too. So
Yeah.
just different things like that. And, as far as packing and snacks, just a couple bars or whatever. And I'm not always good with that. My friend Aubrietta Hope, and you know her, she's very prepared and she thinks everything through and she's got plenty of everything. And I'll still tell you, a lot of times I'm the guy that's like, she's offered stuff too, because maybe I need it, because I didn't pack it. So I do forget things. It doesn't mean I might tell you what I do. That's what I try to do. It doesn't mean I always remember everything. So sometimes I'll be like, oh man, I did not bring this, and this is really crucial. So, yeah, it's she's more prepared than anybody else I've ever shot with, and it's believe me, it's really nice sometimes to have somebody like that around because yeah, she's just things that I wouldn't even think that somebody would have. She's got, and that's really cool because preparedness, especially in the wintertime, is crucial, and especially when you're by yourself, when you're on your own. So I need to be more like her, and I'm working on that, but I'm not getting too far with it. So
Hey, one step at a time.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, and that's that piece that comes from being out there more. You learn over time what you need, what you don't, what's absolutely required, and what are options. From your experience out there, what would you say are the quote unquote biggest risks that an individual might face out there as they go out and embark on their own winter adventures?
Well, I think, I mean, the main thing is you are dealing with a lot of dangerous things. You might be dealing with, slippery surfaces. There's, plenty of rocky drop offs, cliffs that we deal with. Um, I mean, just getting wet, getting hypothermia,
Right.
um, getting lost. You get off the trail. Sometimes these trails aren't real, especially after snowfall, and you might have a lot of wind drifting. So it'd be easy to, maybe lose your way back. um, Sometimes we start wandering around, and you do have your tracks, which is nice. But again, I've had a couple times where I was out in an area that was kind of open, and it was real windy, and it's like, man, I didn't even know where I walked. And that's kind of gets you a little bit. So, um, yeah, things like that. Um, and again, I think having water is huge out there, because you start getting dehydrated, and that can really affect you and the way you think and everything. And
Yeah, it's like
so
disorienting.
it is, yeah, it can be. And again, you might be sweating a lot while you're walking, and then next thing you know, you could end up freezing to death out there. And there's a lot of things that can happen. So again, just letting people know where you're at, where you're going to be. And you know if you have to be alone, do what you got to do. But it is nice to shoot with other people, and I love, I've shot so many trips with my friends, especially Aubrietta Hope and Craig Sturkin, and we've had so much fun and laughs. And it's nice because you never, the dangers are out there, but you also have that confidence when there's more than one of you to go do things. And there's a safety factor there where, if something were to happen, at least there's other people to go back for help, or whatever's needed. So, um, but yeah, it's the UP, and especially near the Lake Superior Shore, it can just be just brutal. The wind and the cold and everything, and the weather can change so quickly. Um, in your forecast that you get in your phone, your weather app, it's not very accurate up there, because Lake Superior just does whatever it wants. It doesn't care. It's not going to do what you think it's going to do, or the weatherman thinks it's going to do. It just does whatever it does, and a lot of times it can really be kind of a problem if you're not prepared. Again, so
That's something that I think all listeners should definitely be aware of is, the role of Lake Superior. Not only does it contribute to creating these beautiful landscapes, but it's also a very dangerous body of water, not just by itself, but the weather it creates, the shelf ice. Just be aware, check what you're doing, look around and make sure that you're conscious of what you're doing, because to your point, up there it's unforgiving. It's the wilderness. It's not anything to second guess, but the beauty of it is that it creates these incredible landscapes, these incredible views, and these just amazing places for us to explore. I want to talk some about that, and your experiences in winter and some of your favorite places to go up there. You've mentioned Grand Island, Tequamanon. Say you had to pick your top three favorite places that are relatively easy to access, call it safe, not too far off the beaten path, known places. What would you recommend people go and check out up there?
well, this is, I mean, a pretty well-known place already at this point. But really, the Munising area, if you're looking for a high concentration of pretty simple but easily accessible places to visit, waterfalls, some lakeshore, um, some nice forest scenes, things like that. That area, and a lot of pictured rocks is that the roads, they don't plow the roads in the wintertime. Some of them, like up to Miners Castle and places like that. But just the Munising area, even outside of the park itself, there's some nice stuff there, and great spot in the wintertime, summertime or wintertime. But um, really enjoy that area. You got ice caves there. You've got some waterfalls. Get some sometimes frozen waterfalls too that just come down in like columns.
Yeah.
Um, also Marquette, the shoreline at Marquette is really always a fun place to go. You've got this Presque Isle Park. but also you've got places up north of there between that big bay, um, up on what 550. There's some nice spots, Little Presque Isle and
Yeah.
places like that that just have beautiful shorelines, and you catch them at the right time of the winter too. You can get some real nice ice along the shore, and good places for sunrise there too at Marquette, the way it faces. So that's another good one. I love the Presque Isle River at the Porkies. I know it's a long drive for just for maybe not a real accessible area in the park because the road's closed, South Boundary Road, um, but for the Presque Isle River, hiking that in the wintertime is beautiful. I mean, I've been there when it was like totally covered in ice. You could barely see anything, which that was not real exciting. But if you can catch it when there's areas of exposed water, that's really cool. Beautiful and peaceful. And a lot of times you won't see anybody there. That's the real feeling of like solitude and peace is when you go to a place like that and there's nobody around. You don't see a single other car, and you can just enjoy this beautiful scenery and just to hear that river rushing. So I really enjoy that too.
Yeah, all beautiful places too. I really enjoy Marquette and the Presque Isle River. I enjoy the Upper Peninsula as a whole. It's just a beautiful place. It's
Yeah.
it's unlike really anything else. It's at Lake Superior shoreline. Lake Superior as a whole, that region is just so well defined with geology and unique characteristics. When you're in these places and you're walking around, you're taking it all in, you're looking for these scenes. Is there like a specific type of scene you're looking to photograph, or are you starting small details and working up to the bigger scene, or vice versa, or is it just kind of situationally dependent?
Yeah, I'm not real systematic with how I do that. I just as I go, what I see, and I might change lenses back and forth a couple times, just because if I'm there in that spot, maybe I might see something that looks better wide angle, or a lot of times, I love finding the kind of the more intimate scenes and the tighter shots of let's say I took a shot earlier this spring of one of the potholes there with the kind of a tree hanging off the cliff above it, and just finding that right shutter speed that works for that scene to show that spring rush, and kind of demonstrate how heavy that water was flowing and just the intensity of it. I really enjoy trying to get that figured out, and yeah, I don't know, I don't really have a specific thing I'm going after, but it's just kind of like depending on the situation and what I see, I'll and again, I might have to just switch lenses a couple times back and forth, which is not fun to do, and I never enjoy that. I just wish I could stick with one, but sometimes it just has to be done. Because maybe if I say, "Oh, I'll come back to that later," I might not. I may forget about it. So just take it in as you go, and a lot of times I'll incorporate like part of my scene with rushing water where it's soft and show movement and flow with something that is textured and static and that kind of anchors the shot. And, you know, those two contrasts of textures there really work together nicely. So, maybe something like that. Um, if I'm going kind of a tighter shot, but yeah, it's just kind of whatever's working for me that day. And sometimes you go out on a day and you feel really creative, like you could just find things. And other days you go out and you just feel like, man, I cannot get something going here.
Yeah, it's like
And
you hit that wall.
yeah, yeah. And it's just some days it works, some days it doesn't. Sometimes it's just having the right mindset, and you might just maybe you're tired, maybe I don't know, it could be a mood thing, whatever it is, but some days I feel on and some days I don't. And so you just hope when you take these long trips that you're having some good days up there where you're feeling like you're creative and everything's working right. So
Yeah,
mentally, so
yeah, because that's one thing that I really admire about especially your winter photos is you're working with those small scenes and those details. You're taking in a scene by the sum of its parts and kind of extracting the parts that are speaking to you most clearly. You're finding those finer details. You're finding those scenes that they make sense. They're balanced. They're cohesive. The all the elements are there that make it a powerful image. As you're going through and looking, what's your thought process behind, the elements of, subject selection or breaking pieces out of this monochromatic landscape that's ultimately, for lack of a better term, I don't want to say desolate, but it's bare.
Yeah, that's the thing with winter. It does have that. It can have that feel to it. And winter's so beautiful, but I think that it can have that look of, you know, maybe kind of cold and desolate as well. I guess for me, like when I'm trying to compose these shots, again, like everything, you're trying to just keep simple. Like you are looking at the lines and how they work together in the scene and maybe the shapes and lines and contrast and textures a lot of times is what I'm looking at, and maybe a contrast in uh color, with warm and cold um tones in the shot as well. All that stuff kind of goes together to make that. And you know it's I used to, when I shot, I would kind of always find these wider angle scenes, and I always wanted to get better at the more intimate, like abstracts. And I don't know if I'm there, but I'm working on it. Like over the last few years, I think I've taken a lot more of those and shared a lot more and posted a lot more on my site. And um, they're hard. They are difficult to do because, again, you're not just going up to a beach and standing there and, okay, this is beautiful. There it is. Here you're trying to find some beauty out of something that's kind of hard to figure out sometimes and make it work and turn it into something that makes sense and tells a story or has some kind of meaning.
Yeah.
Um, but I think for me, it's just trying to simplify the chaotic scene that you're walking into out there. And I don't mean chaotic as in like, in a sense that most people think, but I think chaotic is in busy. Maybe there's a lot of stuff going on in the scene and you're trying to break it down and simplify it.
Yeah.
And
Bringing that organization from chaos.
yeah, absolutely. And again, we can't move things around, but we can adjust where we stand and how high we have our set our tripod, and all these little moves that you make. And I always talk about this in the workshops. Like you may have a starting point when you find something, and that's not necessarily going to be your best shot. And a lot of times it's not. It's that how many shots down the line you're working this shot and trying to figure out how to make it better. And a lot of times it can be better, and you're just trying to figure out how. And it might take these little adjustments or angles changes or things like that might make the composition look better. But it's fun. It's like working on a puzzle when you're trying to figure this out. And a lot of times there's no right or wrong answer, but there's definitely a better answer,
Yeah.
and that's what I enjoy. So and one more thing I want to mention too while I'm at it. Doing a lot of these intimate scenes and these abstracts, it's like a lot of it was kind of, and I don't want to say out of necessity, but a lot of it came from just having bad light. Like so many times I'd go out and just things didn't happen in the sky, or maybe the light was bad or the conditions weren't great. And instead of being like, okay, there's nothing here and leaving, I was like, hey, I'm here. I'm going to find something. And just forced me to look around some more and kind of dig into what was down at my feet and maybe smaller details. And the cool thing about it is if you get down close enough, you can make small details look big and interesting and make it feel like you could walk right into that scene. So it's fun to do.
That's one of the big things with winter for me that really I think is a shared feeling amongst all photographers is the light. You kind of have one of two things. It's either nice and overcast, and you have that nice, even soft light that doesn't give you a lot of contrast, or you've got the harsh, glaring sun that's just filling your scene with hot spots and highlights, and your light meter's going crazy, and nothing's adding up for you. As you're out there experiencing winter, taking in these different situations, working with these scenes in that soft light, that balanced light, where we have time to include different elements and kind of break it down by the sum of its parts, move around, take our time with it. when it's the opposite of that, and we've got great light, or we're working with actual sunlight, not diffused light through overcast skies. What are you thinking at that point? Like, what's your process of eliminating those hot spots, or those really, really bright clipped, but I should say possibly clipped areas, to get that full dynamic range in the scene, and just working with those challenging lighting conditions?
Yeah, there's situations where it might just not really work out too well. And there's some situations where you can bracket and get a maybe a good result from it.
Hmm.
Just kind of depends like how much how many hotspots you've got, how big they are. If there's really large areas in your scene that are having that situation, maybe it's just not going to work out at that moment. But yeah, there's shots that I've got that I was able to, a sunny, snowy scene where there's a lot of shadows and a lot of highlights, where it could work. Other times, maybe not so much, but again, just like this past fall when I had a lot of really sunny blue sky days when I was up there, um, I just started to get into the shadows and just work in the shadows and see what I could find. And that's where again it forces you into maybe opening up your vision a little more and becoming more creative and learning how to shoot things that maybe you did before, or at least effectively, shoot and make them look, um, you know, shoot them in a way that's interesting and artistic and tells a story. But yeah, that's where I might find shaded areas and look for things.
Yeah,
Maybe the highlights are just too much to handle. And that's tough. Middle of the day and you get real bright highlights like that and shadows. It's hard to work with. One other thing too, in overcast days, it's interesting too, because like a lot we quite often we get people in our workshop and they'll take their shots. We'll be out shooting on an overcast day, and they'll come back and bring their images up on the computer, and they're like, man, they just look drab and colorless. And I'm like, well, that's how winter scenes come out with your raw files, on those overcast days. But again, you can bring them back to life and make them look like the way you saw them. And so if it happens to you and you're listening and your shots aren't ruined, they probably just need to, you know, increase the exposure, bring up the shadows maybe a little bit, and it won't look so drab. And the color is going to come back in your shot when you do that. You know,
yeah.
you might you might have some trees that you can barely see the color of the pine needles, but just a little bit of work in Lightroom and you can get those back. So
That muted palette that's synonymous with winter. That's a great point, that it's kind of this combination of all these different things it makes winter challenging. It makes it exciting, but challenging all the same, because we're working with a very different set of circumstances than we would be at any other time of year. Where spring, we've got the spring bloom and all these beautiful wildflowers. The trees are vibrant green, and summer, especially fall, the Upper Peninsula in fall is just like a paintbrush across the landscape of every color imaginable. And I think that's something that really threw me off when I went up there for the first time in winter. It was just, I don't want to say uninspiring, but it was a challenge, because you're used to seeing your favorite places with green leaves or fall color or spring color or what have you. As you're coming into these areas, and the color palette is just basically black and white, what are you doing to find inspiration in those situations where you just look around and you're like, what am I doing here? Like, what is, like, what, there's no color. What am I going to do with this scene?
yeah, that's tough. I mean, I've had a couple trips like that where it's like, oh, this is not what I was hoping for. Maybe, and I know there's been a couple trips, and there was one in Munising before where it hadn't snowed in like a couple weeks. They'd had a couple warm days, and you know how the snow looks after all that. It starts
Yeah.
looking kind of dirty and just not nice. And so you're trying to figure out what to do to make a good shot. It's almost a little bit sad looking at some point too, like, but that's where again you got to kind of shift your focus, I think. And I'm telling you this, but this is just what I do. It doesn't mean that it works for everybody, and maybe it doesn't work for me either. I don't know. But just, what I try to do is just shift my focus and look at, okay, you know, look for little pockets of beauty, and they're going to be there somewhere. They're there, right?
Yeah.
They might not be real noticeable. They might not be in your face. But if you look hard enough, hopefully you find something. Usually I do, or it doesn't mean I get a great shot of it, but I try my best. um, and like in Munising that trip, I did some things differently that I haven't. Some of the places I shot, like even Wagner Falls, I shot that from a different angle than I've ever shot it before. I used a fallen birch tree as part of the kind of the foreground, and found some interesting ice hanging off that I used. That again, if it was more beautiful of a scene, I may have stood back and shot it, maybe in its entirety, or shot at a different angle. But it just kind of it's what I could find, and I'm not saying it was my favorite shot in the world, but it entertained me, and I enjoyed it, and I don't think the shot, if someone were to look at it, they wouldn't say, "Oh, that looks like a drab winter day," or that looks like a pretty depressing winter shot, or anything like that. Like they wouldn't know, because again, just trying to find a way to shoot it that accentuates the beauty and not the stuff that maybe doesn't look so good.
Getting back into the details and
Yeah.
and seeking it out, like you were talking about. I really liked how you mentioned, you kind of have that starting point and you move around, and that works with everything, light, color, notably composition, but all these contributing elements are coming together to form that image and share that story that you're trying to capture in that scene. It's one of those things that I struggle with it myself, where you pull up somewhere, you look around, and it's just like what's here, and you've got to take that time with the scene, and it builds back into what we talked about right up front in the beginning of the episode, is that patience piece with
Hmm.
just allowing yourself to experience the landscape, allowing yourself to kind of take it as it is, as opposed to what you want or what you were expecting, and being careful with your expectations, because as we all know, that big grand epic shot that we're hoping for, fingers crossed, we're banking on coming home with it. It's not always a guarantee, and most of the time, in my experience, anyways, it's probably not a guarantee at all. So,
Well, I've got trips where, I had a great time and I took a lot of shots, and maybe the conditions weren't the best. Um, and maybe I have 2,000 shots of water rushing, over in front of ice or something,
yeah,
and it's kind of redundant, but it's fun and it's good practice. And, if you can come away with a couple interesting ones, that's great. And that's one thing, like when you're up there, maybe the conditions aren't the way you want it. And it's kind of a really gray, gloomy day. Um, and maybe it hasn't snowed in a while and it doesn't look real fresh, but one thing you can often find, at least, is rushing water, ice, maybe ice on the edge of a river or creek up there. You can find, there's plenty of trees, tree trunks, interesting bark. You've got like cedar branches that are always interesting on snow, things like that. So there's like little things that you can find and look for, at least. And playing with shutter speed too in that water. You can make some interesting shots and compositions with just different uses of shutter speed. Showing motion with texture, and maybe make it a little softer if you've got something with more texture in it, like some interesting rocks. But just playing around with it, and you might not be happy with the results, or maybe further down the line as you shoot, you'll kind of like, okay, I'm getting this. This is working for me. But nothing. If nothing else, it's really good practice and it's fun.
yeah, it's just rewarding to be out there and experiencing it, leaning into creating and doing what you love. One thing that came to mind as you were saying that was like those pivot points where, we recognize, hey, this area is not working, or this scene isn't going to work, this subject isn't going to work. As you're going through your process, looking at the scenes that you have available, say shoreline, forest interior, waterfalls, in your experience, what would you say winter in the Upper Peninsula is best at amongst those when things just aren't going right? Maybe the light's right and you got to pivot off of the shoreline for a sunrise and now you're going somewhere else. What should people be looking for or considering if they're planning to go up there in the winter?
Yeah, I think just having, I think it helps if you haven't done it or you're not real familiar with places up there. That's probably where it is good to plan out things a little better and just, knowing what your locations are and, you have a contingency plan if this place doesn't work out or doesn't maybe look great. Because that does happen a lot. Things just
Yeah,
don't always go your way. And that's half the fun though. If everything was so easy, I don't think it would be nearly as exciting when you do get that shot.
right.
But yeah, I think that you know, just trying to figure out what works. Like, if it's sunny, if it's overcast, where do you go for an overcast shot? You probably, get in the woods, shooting waterfalls. If it's sunny out or there's, the sun's out or maybe some clouds mixed with it, the shoreline is great for that. And, you're not dealing with all these harsh shadows like you are in the woods. And or shoot, even the ice caves, you can do it either time. You can go when it's overcast, or you can shoot in the ice caves when it's sunny because you're shooting out, um, out from the inside of the ice cave. So it really doesn't matter so much. Now, I really enjoy shooting the ice caves with the sun coming at it from the outside. So you're maybe shooting a sun star from the inside of it. Just kind of trying to figure out what works. Um, and I think that, the more you do this stuff, the more you kind of figure out what's going to work during each condition and maybe what a good place will be to go to. Maybe if there is less snow or maybe more ice or less ice or, there's always different situations where like, oh, I bet you this place might be something to check out this time.
Yeah.
And it just kind of comes with, experience of going to them in different years. And again, every winter is going to be different. So you really don't know what you're walking into unless you have somebody up there that's taking pictures for you, that's showing you what's going on, or you're seeing it on Facebook. And on Facebook, you can't necessarily say, "Oh, I saw a picture of that." I mean, that's what it looks like. Well, that doesn't mean it's from this year. I
Right.
mean, we all post
Right.
photos from previous winters that we like to share because a lot of people they don't see our photos. Um, Maybe they just sort of following us, and so we want to share a shot we took a couple winters ago. So that happens unless somebody says like, "I took this yesterday," then maybe you could trust that.
Yeah.
Other than that, don't ever take a photo and say, okay, it looks good up there because it might not be current. So um, but yeah,
And the conditions change quick too. So,
yeah,
you
they
know,
do.
there could be a huge snowstorm today, and then 3 days from now, it could look totally different again. So,
Yeah, yeah. And early winter and late winter, like you get into the spring, like temps go up and down and you could get a big snowfall and then a thaw. So it's just, again, I think having those expectations kind of dampened a little bit is good. I remember back in 2013. Oh, geez. I think it was January, which usually is pretty safe bet when you're going up to the UP. And uh, my wife and I, we took our kids, and we had are just the two at the time. They were really young, and we went up to Munising, hoping for a great time up there and good winter shooting and all that. And yeah, we got up there and it was like there's no snow. There's hardly any snow. Like they had a big thaw not too long before that, and just very disappointing as we're driving up. And I'm thinking, oh man, what are we doing? And but I did get one of my favorite winter shots that night when we got there on that trip. Um, and so I'm glad we kept going because I don't know if you've seen on my site, I've got one of a big chunk of ice just sitting there right front and center in front of my lens. And there's kind of a, the sun had just gone down behind it. It's like twilight.
yeah.
It's a big, beautiful, detailed piece of ice right there in front of your face, and that was the shot I took. And so, yeah, it didn't look very wintry up there, but just that little scene that I had and the lakeshore was that was enough. And
Yeah.
I came away with at least one shot that I was happy with that trip. So that was good.
That's something that I always tell myself is, if you come away from your trip with one image that you're happy with, that's still a successful trip. I mean, it's not about coming home with 100 portfolio images and putting that pressure on yourself to just produce, produce, produce. It just stress you out, drive you crazy. That's the only thing you're focused on.
Yeah. And I think too, like, for people like you and me that have websites and we've got social media and all that, you tend to put more pressure on yourself. People do. I'm not saying, and I used to do that a lot more where it was like, man, I got to get more shots, because I need to keep getting new stuff for my website or this or that. And it's like, I don't need to do that. I do what I want to do. And if people like it, great. And if they don't, that's okay too. They don't have to follow my work or buy my work, but really it's all just for me, and everything else will follow if you're doing stuff the way the way you feel that it should be done, and you enjoy doing it and you love the subjects that you're shooting. It'll all kind of come through, and people will see that in your images and enjoy it. And if they don't, that's fine too. But to
Right.
have that security of like, okay, I'm happy with a shot. And a lot of the shots that I'm happy with, I don't get a great response necessarily from people on social media when I post it. Um, but that's okay. I'm happy with it. And to me, that's kind of what matters at this point.
If we measured the quality of our work based on how well it performs against the algorithm or what have you, we'd all be probably pretty discouraged people because I've had the same experience where I'm like, I love this picture, check this out, and it just flops. I'm like, oh, okay. But it's
Yeah.
one of those things where I really like your approach of do it from the heart, share the scenes that speak to you, and that's where you're going to find your best images, especially with the challenging conditions of winter and the complex colors and the super simplified details and all that. As you take all your experiences into consideration and you think across all your trips over the years of doing photography, and what would you say would be the best time of year for winter scenes or for winter specific conditions in the Upper Peninsula or Lower Michigan?
Well, that can be difficult. The winters the last couple of years have been kind of unpredictable. Like last year when I went up in mid-February, there were some areas that were had I mean there was just patches of snow and just patches of like no snow. It was amazing. And that usually that's a pretty safe bet mid-February. So
Yeah,
um it's hard, but I would say that probably if you want a real safe bet, February is a good month for it. I don't think you really go wrong. Late January into February. Shoot, some of the ice caves I shot and some of the best ice I've seen is in early March.
really.
So, but again, from winter to winter, you just don't know. Really hard to predict, and it's hard to if you're going to plan out a trip, like let's say 6 months out. It's kind of hard to do
Yeah.
because you just don't know. I mean, you could get a thaw next week, and it could happen. But yeah, I mean, I think February is a safe month to do it. By that time, if and it really depends too if what you're shooting, because if you're looking for like ice caves, the ice is really by the time February comes around, the ice is really built up to where those ice curtains are pretty thick at that time, and it's filled in pretty nicely. But if you're trying to shoot maybe the lakeshore where you want some good ice on the lakeshore, but you still want to shoot the waves coming in,
Hmm.
you don't want the lake froze over. So maybe you need to shoot earlier in the year or later in the winter, like when it's more like springtime. So it's it's really hard to catch, and sometimes you just need to pay attention on what's going on, maybe on Facebook. Just looking at there's some people's pages or certain uh, tourism bureau pages up there that have kind of things that are going on right now or what things are looking like. That's a good way to go too, and just you know kind of pay attention to those because At least you kind of know what you're walking into somewhat. If you have something in your head, you might be surprised. It might not look that way. So,
Yeah, you can get that information before you're committing to a trip. That's huge, and I think that's something that it's really helped me over the years too. Of just doing a quick search to see what the conditions are.
mhm,
What does it look like? What are these different factors that I'm going to be walking into? So you can at least prepare.
mhm.
It's like one of the places that I've wanted to go to for a long time. It's not in the Upper Peninsula, but nearby the Apostle Islands there in Wisconsin. There's similar, ice caves out there, but they haven't been frozen, or Lake Superior hasn't been frozen enough since 2015 to where you can actually access them. So, we've had some strange winters here the last few years, but it, like you said, it's a part of it, and we just roll with it. One final question before we close it all out here: what advice would you give to a photographer planning their first winter trip to the Upper Peninsula?
I would say probably to, you know, first of all, make sure you bring all the right equipment, and safety is the big thing when it comes to, um, again, winter photography and traveling up in the UP in winter. Do you have a shovel in your car? You might want to bring a bag of cat litter. That wouldn't hurt either. Do you have all the things that you need if things go wrong? Definitely have a checklist of items that, if you get in a bad situation, you can, you're not going to be in big trouble. So that's the big one. I think, and I started off with saying, I don't plan a lot, but I think early on, especially your first trip, you kind of want to have a base plan. It doesn't mean that everything has to be exactly, planned out to a T, but at least you kind of have things figured out where you're going to go and what you're going to do. Because, again, this is all being new to you. Um, you kind of want to know what you're walking into,
Yeah.
where you're going to be going, how long it's going to take, and how much time it might take you. So yeah, I would say those are the biggest things. Just some level of planning and making sure you're equipped with the right gear. And when I say the right gear, I mean like clothing and boots and gloves and all that. So bring extra. Have an extra set of everything. What happens if your feet get wet out there? There's all kinds of situations that can go wrong. Always have a pair of a set of ice cleats. Bring, you know, always bring those.
Yeah.
And I would say at least 3/8 inch or larger. Like yak tracks aren't going to cut it. You're going to need something with a lot more teeth to dig in. So make sure you bring something like that. But yeah, those are the big things. Just so you don't put yourself in a dangerous situation.
Yeah.
And again, and if you are going to go by yourself, just let somebody know where you're going. Text a loved one and say, here's where I'm headed to right now. And I know the cell service is not great up there, so you might have to do it maybe a little before you get to the location. But just so you do that, because you know um it's the weather can change quickly, and that the cold weather up there can really cause havoc. So, but the nice thing is, winter photography, it's so rewarding. It's so much fun. And the formations that you can shoot up there and that you can find are just like, sometimes you're up there and you're like, man, this is amazing. Like just out of this world type scenery. And so when you find stuff like that, um, it's worth the discomfort that you might go through sometimes to get it. But it's a blast. I just love it.
It's beautiful up there. It's inspiring. It's magical. The Upper Peninsula as a whole is just a wonderful place, and I'm actually going to be heading up there myself in a couple weeks here to get my first winter adventure started. So I'm ready. I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Yeah. I hope, I know there's not a lot of snow up there right now in most of the
Yeah.
UP. So hopefully that snow machine gets going here. And yeah, I'm looking forward to getting up there myself here in a few weeks. So
Yeah. Yeah. You've got a workshop coming up. How can people find more of your information, learn about your workshops, and get involved?
yeah. So I do workshops with Aubrietta Hope, a friend of mine. We've been doing these now since 2018, and we've got a winter workshop coming up in Munising, based out of the Rome Inn in Munising. There, great place to do that. We are sold out for that, but we do that yearly. We do it every February, and the next one we do have open spots is in the spring. It's in late May, right at the end of May. There we've got one back in Munising at Picture Rocks again. So if you'd like to join us, we'd love to have you. You can go to neilweaverphoto.com, or if you want to check out our workshop site, it's visionlandscapephotoworkshops.com. And my website also has a link over to that site, so it's a little shorter of a web internet name there. So anyway, but you can find them there. It's got all our upcoming events, and we do one up in the Porcupine Mountains in the fall, and we do a night sky workshop at Sleeping Bear Dunes every September. So we hope you can join us for one if you're interested. So
Definitely, and I'll include all the links to all that in the show notes too for everyone to go check out, so that you guys can head over there, see Neil's work, and check out the workshops. Um, Aubrietta's awesome. I know Aubrietta too, and
yes,
she's a great person.
absolutely.
So and Craig, can't forget about Craig.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
But
yeah, we have a good time. So
definitely, definitely. Well, thank you very much for joining, Neil. I certainly appreciate it. You taking your time to share your insight and experience regarding Michigan in winter and the experiences that come with it.
thanks again for having me, Nick. I appreciate it.
Thank you all for enjoying this episode of the Lakescape Photography Podcast. And another huge thank you to Neil Weaver for joining us. See you guys on the next one. Take care, everybody.